co-laborer in Christ, Paul Batz.
Thanks, Bob. I'm honored to be speaking to you today. I love kings, and I want to just jump into what I have to say. Today I've been asked to speak about life after graduation. What exactly is life like on the other side? Now, without getting ahead of myself, I'd like to give you an entertaining and humorous history of my time at King's as a way of introduction. As much as I enjoyed being a student at King's, I was awfully confused during my time here. In my first year, I was determined to be a chemist. My marks were satisfactory coming out of high school, and I had had the opportunity to meet Dr. Mahaffey, who encouraged me to join his program. So I did. Now, this is where much of the confusion starts. I distinctly remember being part of a group project in which we were all expected to create our own lab. And I felt so sorry for my group partners, because I knew that the level of insight I would be able to offer them was little to none. Thankfully, I was at King's, where the Christian ethic of compassion is instilled in the large majority of its students, and my group partners were nice enough to let me repetitiously and, well, quite mindlessly titrate in an effort to avoid doing anything more difficult than this. Now, eventually the day came when we were called to write our final exams of the second semester. Dr. Ooms was our teacher at the time, and while I knew things weren't going as well as they could be, I had this feeling that everything would be all right, and I would at least pass this final exam. So the day came, and Dr. Ooms, with a caring look of reassurance, handed me my final exam. I quickly glanced through the 18 or so pages of the booklet, and quickly realized I didn't have a clue what I was doing. It was as if I mistakenly stepped into a physics exam for a physics class I wasn't even taking. Sadly, this wasn't the case. I was indeed at the right exam, albeit with all the wrong answers. On second thought, even this is an exaggeration. In truth, I was at the right exam with no answers at all. The following day, I get a call. And guess who it is? It's Dr. Ooms. He tells me that we need to talk immediately, and I proceed to meet him in his office. Being legitimately concerned, he starts by asking me if everything is all right, to which I respond by saying that I feel great. It feels good to have finished my last exam, I tell him. He tells me that we need to talk about that exam. Did I pass? I ask him. No, he tells me. Out of 116 questions, you only got 4 right. That's roughly 3% if you're wondering. Given this history, it's quite surprising that I even remained at King's. Of course, as you can imagine, I didn't remain a chemist, and quickly found refuge in English while also minoring in theology. To my honest surprise, this actually worked out better than I thought, setting me on a path towards graduation. Graduation is a double-edged sword. It is simultaneously the desired result of your studies, and also the unwanted source of dread, best captured with the question, so what are you doing after you graduate? In my quest to answer this question, I decided that the best way to go about this, given the fact that I was now graduating with a Bachelor of Arts and not a Bachelor of Science, was to continue with more schooling. So I applied for a Master's in Theology at the University of St. Andrews in Scotland. Being skeptical of even gaining entrance, I was shocked when I stumbled upon my acceptance letter in the junk folder of my email. It was an unlikely dream come true. Upon arriving in Scotland, with the exception of a few challenges, I was able to integrate well into European culture. Occasionally I found myself biking on the wrong side of the road, which almost got me killed, but for the most part, I felt very good about my situation. Then classes started. It wasn't long before I realized that I was out of my league. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was headed again for a repeat of my experience with chemistry. But this time, it was with something I thought I was good at. After several panic attacks, my time in Scotland came to an abrupt end after only 2 months. Without planning for it, I had suddenly lost my identity as a student. 19 years as a student, suddenly over. As much as I assumed that this would give me a source of liberation, it was shocking how oppressed I felt in the absence of an answer to the question, who am I? We all long for an answer to this question, and for the most part, during our time at King's, we feel as though we have a reliable answer. I am a student at the King's University. Collectively, we define ourselves through the lens of what it means to be a student. Our identity is wrapped up in things like our grades and those papers we write, which give us a sense of success and failure. But these marks of identity are contingent on our experience as a student and fail to offer us a lasting sense of identity past the point of graduation. After returning from Scotland, I experienced a significant degree of shame and confusion. Shame over the fact that I had failed, and confusion over the sudden loss of my identity. While it was difficult to explain my situation with others who asked why I was back so soon, I found it exceedingly difficult to tell my professors what had happened. They were the ones who encouraged me to pursue a master's in the first place. And in my mind, I had failed them. After 4 weeks of avoiding it, I finally ended up telling them what had happened. I'd like to now read to you the most moving passage of a response I received from Dr. Herrick. And please know with firm assurance that I have no sense that you failed me, Paul. Exactly the opposite. Success and failure are not really Christian words. Faithfulness is. And I have no doubt that you will continue to be faithful in whatever you do. Today, I want to encourage you, just like Dr. Herrick encouraged me, to deeply consider the difference between successfulness and faithfulness, because there is a world of difference between the two. As we see time and time again throughout the biblical narrative, God is not interested, to the exclusion of others, in working with those who are successful. Rather, he is repeatedly interested in working with those we might mistakenly deem failures. St. Peter, seemingly the biggest failure of them all, is paradoxically the rock on which Christ built his church. And again, St. Paul taps into this idea in his first letter to the Corinthians. He tells the believers this: brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chooses the foolish. He elects the weak. And he sets apart the ones we deem lowly. God is a God whose power is made perfect in weakness. This is the radical message of the cross. I'd like to now shift gears just slightly in my perception of life after graduation. It has really struck me recently how many of my longtime friends have suddenly made a significant effort to reconnect with me. While we were in school, I suppose we just took our friendships for granted. They were simply given to us, in a sense, and we never really had to work at it. Yet suddenly, upon our departure from high school and university, there now exists a new longing for one another. There's suddenly a desire for a depth of relationship that never previously existed. Hearing words like, "I really miss you," are startling, especially coming from a guy, yet are indicative of a quite dramatic development that I suppose I just didn't expect upon graduation. If I've learned anything from this, I would suggest to you, with some foresight, that you ought to really cherish your friendships with one another. Please resist the temptation to take your friendships for granted. Be vulnerable with one another. Enter into each other's worlds. Turn off your phones and be present with one another. Learn to be a friend. Finally, with the remaining time I have left, I feel compelled to stress the importance that church has had in my life after graduation. I am aware that you recently had an IS conference that was focused on answering the question, does the church matter? This is a fantastic question, and one to which I want to emphatically say yes to. Allow me to briefly explain why. Before being hired at Canada Post as a mailman, I was left with neither a job nor a school to attend for a period of 6 months after my return from Scotland. This was a difficult period of my life. Yet in retrospect, I've come to treasure that time I had, because it forced me to think about who I was apart from either of these attributes we often use to define ourselves. Further, I thank God that throughout this time, I was not asked to do this alone. Inside the church, I was repeatedly reminded that Christians are in the business of continually reaffirming with one another that our identity consists of more than what we have done as individuals. There is something more important, more constitutive than our mere successes and our mere failures. Within the church, our identity is married to the fact that God's faithfulness is more determinative than any of our individual successes and failures. Praise God that He has made this so. Thank you.